Thanks so much. I think just to highlight that this data that I'm presenting, it's only a few slides, comes from the annual registry survey that I ran in 2023. This was a survey for which we got responses from just over 60 registries, and we asked a series of questions, and we're going to be running a similar survey in another couple of weeks this year for 2024. The idea is many of the questions will be similar to see if there's sort of improvement or change or development across the sector, but there will be a few new questions that will sort of test some emerging areas of interest. So I do encourage registries who are here to look out for that survey. It will take about 5 or 6 minutes for someone who knows the registry well to complete. And hopefully you'll see when I present some data that's very useful data for sort of advocacy and planning purposes. So look, I've just got a little bit of information about the registries that from our sample of 60. And these are from our survey last year. So I think the slide on the left just shows that many of the registries, contrary to maybe what people think, many of the registries in the sector are actually pretty mature. So we've got, a very high number of registries or proportion of registries that have been around for 10 or more years, with as well some newer emerging registries. So, the mature registries are really able to participate in a whole breadth of activities, including research, as well as potentially some of the newer registries. In terms of the amount of data that they collect, the figure on the right shows the annual patient recruitment or episodes, and the most common there is for a registry to collect between 500 or 5,000 patients or recruitment or episodes of care. But certainly there are registries that collect up to 20,000 or even more than 20,000 procedures or episodes a year. So that's a lot of data that's being collected by these registries on an annual basis. Next slide. And in terms of the survey responses, the sorts of characteristics of some of the registries, the majority of registries that monitor medical conditions. If you look at that slide on the left, that blue colour is for medical conditions. Next, followed by surgical procedures. Then a small proportion, I think about 7% for drug or device monitoring as their primary purpose, and then a smaller number for service registries. And I realise we don't have mental health as a response option, so we'll be adding that into our survey for this coming year, because that's obviously a really important part, and I'm seeing growth in mental health registries, which is fantastic. In terms of geographic distribution of the registries that we've had in our responses, they're either predominantly national or binational. All right, I've got one person saying they can't hear me. Can most people hear me? Yep, okay, thanks.
Yep.
All right, so they're mainly national or binational, which means that the data is, generally data across the whole country, and is not just single site or a few sites, but it's generally very representative data. And also in terms of the proportion of the population that the registries think they're capturing, nearly 50% of registries surveyed thought that they captured at least 80% of the population. So that's a lot of coverage. And while, of course, to run a registry-based trial, you don't necessarily need to capture the whole population, it certainly shows that registries aim over time, and often that takes, a number of 10 years or 5 to 10 years or so to get that sort of coverage, but it's pretty impressive. Next slide. So again, a little bit more information about registries. About 70% of registries, so the blue on the top left there, collect identified data. So I think that's very useful, again, if you're wanting to link the data from the registry, from the registry-based trial, for example, with other data sources. The one graph in the middle there is around the latest time for systematically collected follow-up data. So over 30% of registries collect follow-up data beyond 2 years, and only about 15-16% collect baseline data only. So again, that's a particularly useful set of information, is this follow-up data that registries collect, whether they run the trial or whether they want to provide follow-up data for other trials. It's a very useful data set to have. And certainly in terms of patient-reported outcome data, we're just seeing continued growth in this by registries, and was nearly 50% surveyed collected patient-reported outcome data last year. Got just a couple more slides. The next one, Sarah, is just about outcomes that we thought were particularly relevant to registry-based trials or registry research. So just to highlight that most registries are academic and produce regular academic publications. They pretty much all are happy to give their data upon request, and there's an approval process usually. And I was really interested in this. Over 50% said that in some way or other they support clinical trials, which is fantastic. You know, there's more than the 60 registries that we survey, so there's a lot of potential out there for clinical trials to be supported. Okay, and I've got 2 more slides. One is just some thoughts about how clinical registries can support clinical trials, and our presenters today will be talking about this in much more information, much more detail, but so they can provide data, but they could also have their registry infrastructure support trials. So in terms of data, identifying potential numbers of eligible participants for sample size calculations prior to a study, providing outcome data, as I mentioned, to a clinical trial. It may be a different clinical trial, and it can include PROMS data, and also providing comparative outcome data if a study doesn't have a comparator group. That's also potential if they're closely aligned. In terms of using registry infrastructure, so obviously recruiting participants from the registry, randomizing participants using registry infrastructure, or clustering, etc., in terms of the study design for the trial, conducting the trial using the existing clinical registry data, and also potentially using the existing registry data collection infrastructure for adding sub-study or extra data items in for the trial as well. So they're just some thoughts, but I'm sure we'll hear much more from our speakers, and I would just like to introduce them in the next slide and thank them very much for their time today. So we've got Cecilia, who will be speaking first, I think, who's currently the chair of the Signet Actus Signet and is the network manager of the National Endometriosis Clinical and Scientific Trials Network. And she'll be followed by Jo Fitzsimons, who's the executive officer for the Australian Early Psychosis Collaborative Consortium. And I think we've got half an hour to go, So I think if we allocate about 15 minutes for presentation and questions for each speaker, that should get us through to the end of our time. So that's enough listening to me. I'm going to sit back and enjoy listening to our speakers, just like everyone else. So I'll let Cecilia take over, and thank you very much, Cecilia.
There we go. Sorry, I was trying to mute myself. So thank you, Susannah, and the CQR SIG group, as well as ACTA, for the opportunity to present. Okay, so you can all see my screen. Cool. So I'm going to be presenting some of the work that we've done as a network, as well as having a registry to do some of the research to expand on endometriosis. And our network is called the National Endometriosis Clinical and Scientific Trials Network, NECST. And I'm just going to give a overview, a high-level overview of the background, how we started back from 2018, then how we actually developed the registry, going into some of the governance and administration, the partnerships that we've had, our strategy from 2023 to 2026, which was our next lot of funding, and then the enablers and barriers of having a network as well as a registry under our banner. So to begin with, this all started back in 2017, 2018, because of the patient-driven advocacy and the collaboration between not just patients, but government, policymakers, clinicians, health researchers, scientific researchers, and allied health professionals around the need to look at endometriosis. And because of that, that ended up bringing together the group of people, as well as the National Action Plan for Endometriosis, which was then published back in 2018. This essentially is the blueprint for the endometriosis research group as a whole across all of Australia, and it primarily focused on 3 key areas, with a number of different action items. They encompassed awareness and education, clinical care and management, and research. And out of that, one of the primary action items which started from back then was actually building that collaborative environment to actually lead world-leading research on endometriosis. And that was sort of where NECST was born from. And over that 4-year period, there were a number of key outputs because of that collaboration that started back then, which resulted in a number of publications, a number of national and international conferences presented, as well as an increased amount of media that was provided to all the researchers at that point in time, which also led to one of the first large-scale Australian data to look at incidence and prevalence here in Australia. And not only that, there was also publications around the impact of endometriosis that actually impacted directly on the health and the actual society and cost of burden disease on the actual patients. And as part of this, one of the key pieces of the work that that was one of our own action items for the network was actually establishing and building the NECST registry, which was one of the first Australian clinical databases on this at that point in time. So we started the development and the building back in 2019, and that build allowed us to look at different data collection platforms, as well as building a data dictionary, as well as actually having different working groups for each of the modules that we would have. When we actually did the build on this, we looked through a number of international and even national standards to actually help with actually building the data dictionary and the data elements. We used known data sets and information to help us so that we could actually also not align from a national level, but also internationally if we were to actually collaborate on that more global scale. And as you can see here, we used what is called the WERF effect, and that's a World Endometriosis Society biobanking and harmonization project, and they've got questionnaires that we use. We've used ICD-10 codes, we've used IHW metadata, we've used MBS item numbers as well as PBS numbers as well for medications. So the registry is online and it's cloud-based. We use prospective opt-in consent recruitment, and there is a minimum core clinical and health data that is collected across 8 modules. And we'll also do longitudinal data tracking across the life course of disease. This is what the registry looks like. So there are 2 components to it. There are the patient modules, which the patient themselves enter their own information in, and that mainly is around the demographics as well as the consent, the actual clinical presentation, their medical history, and from the very beginning, we also incorporated PROMs in there. So there's not only just a general quality of life using the EQ5D, we also have one that is endometriosis specific quality of life questionnaire as well. And with that, we do follow them up at 12 months annually as well. So the participants then also get sent these questionnaires at those time points. From the clinical modular side, we have the actual diagnosis component. We actually try and capture any imaging that may be reported, as well as medical management and the surgery, as well as the associated pathology reports that come along with it too. And all of that, of course, is geared towards trying to improve quality of life, to hopefully improve the care and management of those with endometriosis, to support early detection and diagnosis, and also improve therapeutic options, and of course as well to facilitate collaborative research, to then hopefully be able to have better outcomes and understand what is actually going on around endometriosis care in Australia at this current time point. As I mentioned, we do prospective opt-in consent recruiting, And we actually recruit from a number of different areas, from public hospital settings, from private clinicians in their own clinics, because in the world of gynecology and women's health, there is a lot of private specialists that actually provide care. And we also recruit via social media as well. So this is our recruitment and data to date. We started recruiting back in 2020 in December. We have recruited approximately up to the end of September this year, 2,191 participants. We've had drop-offs with our follow-ups, but they've been relatively consistent. So you can see there's about a 50% drop-off in follow-up rates and loss to contact. And over that time, in terms of active withdrawals, we've only had about 41 people actively withdraw from the registry. In terms of actually seeing how much data points that we've had across all of that time period, we are now over 2.3 million data points across all the various different modules. In terms of recruitment sites that we've had, we've sort of grown a little bit year on year. And that'll be one of the barriers that I'll talk about a little bit later. But we've got approximately 13 sites that are actively recruiting at the moment, and we've got 2 pending over in WA. In terms of the NECST network and the administration, the initial funding that we've got from government with the MRFF grant, that was administered by a not-for-profit organisation based in Melbourne, the Jean House for Women's Health Foundation. And that served us quite well to begin with in terms of starting up and actually bring together all the research organisations, the universities, the patient organisations. But as we sort of got towards the end of that period, there was a lot of discussion around what would the next phase look like, where should the next lot of funding go, and where the administration should look towards. And it was actually decided that a university organisation was probably better placed to support us in terms of the actual growth and development, which was why over the course of the period between 2022 and 23, we actually transitioned from Jean Hales, and we are now based at UNSW. And as I mentioned right at the beginning, we could not keep all the work that we do without the support from the endometriosis patient groups and the advocacy groups. And we have an ongoing and continued partnership with them over the course of the period, and they provide advice around the key areas of research that we need to keep pushing forward and keep asking the right questions. We also partner with them to actually look at translation, providing the awareness and information to the general public about endometriosis and some of the key findings that are resulting from our research. In terms of the other research collaborations that we have, you can see here that a number of projects that are currently ongoing. We collaborate with and we collaborate on across the board with a number of institutes across all of Australia. The ones that I've highlighted in pink here are the ones that are actually using data from our NECST registry to support the questions around the key priority areas for endometriosis. Okay, and the endometriosis tissue microarray study is more of a basic science study. The endometriosis environmental risk study actually uses an additional questionnaire around what are potential environmental risk factors that may be related to endometriosis. And we're hoping to have that published sometime next year. We're currently working on that manuscript. With the Australian Endometriosis Clinicians Collaborative, that was a particular grant opportunity from MRFF where we utilised that to actually try and support clinicians to set up and actually start recruiting for the registry. And that is currently in an ongoing study, which we actually need follow-up data. So the more patients we can recruit from the very beginning, the better follow-up data that we'll have. In terms of the next phase of the network and what we're actually trying to do to actually grow and further develop the network and the registry, we are actually focusing on 5 key areas: supporting the early and mid-career researchers, trying to actually look at what data we have currently in the registry, and actually trying to answer those key questions and how that can be translated as well as implemented from the actual research into clinical care. Looking at a diverse and collaborative research program, the ongoing commitment to actually engaging with the community and actual stakeholders to actually work together as a collaborative, and actually also look at how we can actually enhance the registry to facilitate not only data entry, but also keeping participants engaged and keeping them filling in our ongoing questionnaires over a longer term period. So over the last 5-6 years, what have been some of the enablers and barriers that we've experienced as a network and registry? So the key ones, of course, as I've mentioned, is the advocacy, the partnerships and the collaboration, because of the awareness raising that that has generated for endometriosis and women's health in general as well, and the ongoing engagement that that has allowed us to do. Not only that, it has to some level helped reduce some of the duplication of some of the smaller research projects that we were actually finding, and it allowed us to actually consolidate and actually amplify the actual study numbers that goes into any research projects to strengthen that and actually have that as a key strength of ours. Of course, the National Action Plan being the blueprint for what we need to do in Australia for endometriosis continues to actually enable us to actually help us drive our research strategy as well, and the actual support and building of and bringing in the next generation of researchers into the actual field of endometriosis and hopefully being able to keep them there. The other enabler for us right at the very beginning, when we were told to build a network as well as a registry, ACTA has been really significant in providing that support and helping to guide me as the manager to look after all of this, to actually understand what we needed to do, where we needed to go, some of the key things that we needed to also focus on when we actually built our registry as well as the network. With regard to some of the barriers, I think these aren't not common to everyone here on this call. Some of the administration are one of the key barriers, particularly with a registry and doing research. The site governance applications continue to be a barrier just because of the variability of the response of approvals and the time it is taken, which is also why our WA sites are still pending. For us at the moment, I think by last calculation, we're still waiting on approval 14, 15 months, I think, down the line. So that's certainly been a key barrier to actually have more recruitment and collaboration, because they really do want to. Time, of course, actually the time taken for the clinicians to come on board. In terms of people, the workforce, actually having the actual ground staff there to actually do the data entry. Ongoing funding remains an issue because we all work on contracts. None of us really know, if we get funding beyond a certain period, and also retaining participants over the longer term. So that is all I have.
That was fantastic, Cecilia. Thanks so much. I know there's been a couple of comments in the chat. I might just ask Dale's question, which I think is a good one and relevant. I'm interested in who were the key drivers of the registry and network establishment, and how has that changed and how so over the last 5 years?
So the key drivers for us was because of the National Action Plan and that initial activity around wanting to all come together and having that blueprint that really drove the collaboration, as well as the collegiate nature of actually bringing all the people together. So we had a number of workshops as well. So having that central working group from the executive team with the NECST network, driving all of this and actually having those online meetings, I think, because we were actually hitting COVID right up just soon after that initial workshop that we did. And so that has actually been a key driver. It sort of has died down a little bit, and it's more around that ongoing engagement. There's only a small group of us that actually work on this on a day-to-day basis. So keeping up with some of the administration that is required to actually manage both a network and a registry does take some time away from that ongoing engagement to actually provide any updates to members.
Yeah, and also, as you noted, there's been a change in your sponsoring organisation from Jean Hales to the university, and I think that's an interesting thing to note because, you know, registries are long term, and during the lifetime of a registry, sometimes all those sort of things will need to change.
Yes.
So I think it's great that you've done that, and I think I'm certainly aware that with increasing privacy and other data sort of management requirements, you really, if possible, they should align with an organisation that can do that well and can support that. Is there any other questions? I'm just aware of time. I might just make one other quick comment, which is just around your point around retaining participants for meaningful long-term assessment. I think that's a really good issue, and I'm certainly noting with many registries that the response rates drop off after a couple of years. And so I think we really need to get better at, you know, at sampling or targeting long-term follow-up and really putting you know, extra efforts in those that would most benefit from long-term follow-up, because often there's a group of patients that do very well and then tend not to respond. And then how do you target those that you really want to follow up and understand what are the factors associated with those poor responders? I think would be really great. All right. I think thanks so much, Cecilia. It was fantastic. So I'd love to introduce now Jo Fitzsimons, who's here.
1M.
Jo, would you like to get your slides up and share about your experience? Thank you.
Okay. All right. Can everybody see that? I haven't used WebEx before. There we go. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for this opportunity today. My name's Jo. I'm the Executive Officer for APEX. I won't say the full name out loud again, but I would just like to acknowledge our funders. So we've been funded today by the Wellcome Trust, and particularly thank Susannah for her support in being one of our investigators. But also there's a few people on here that I've talked to over my time with APEX, and I don't think we could do this without the support of other people who are going through what we go through. And when Susannah approached me, she kind of acknowledged that we're definitely at the newer end of the scale of both registries and networks, and we've come a long way, but it's been a really interesting road. So I can't, let me see if I'll move my slides. There we go. So APEX came about from a long history. Early psychosis services and research was really born in Australia and came out of Origin, which is the organisation that I work for, based in Parkville, Victoria. Because we know that, like many illnesses, disorders, etc., that early intervention is the most promising treatment for psychosis. But what we've found over the last little while is whilst there was an early focus on early intervention for psychosis starting back about 30 years ago, that had really plateaued with the advent of early intervention in many other much needed areas in mental health. And we really needed to bring the sector back together to be able to progress research, to translate into our clinical practice nationally. But in the mental health sector in particular, the lived experience voice is absolutely, is really, really crucial. As it is in many, but we find that it's very prominent in the mental health sector. So starting back over 10 years ago now, we were trying to bring together researchers across the sector. We didn't have any funding for it. We had a series of meetings where everyone agreed that we needed to do this, but there was no support. And then back in, I have to get my times right, I get very confused by COVID, but maybe late 2018, early 2019, we got an opportunity to apply for funding from the Wellcome Trust, which is a UK-based philanthropic organisation who are focused on supporting infrastructure for psychosis, data infrastructure for psychosis. So we pitched to them that we would set up rather ambitiously both a clinical quality registry and a clinical trials network for the national early psychosis sector in Australia. And they gave us some money and set us on our way, and then COVID hit. So I would say that that severely impacted the progress, the rate of progress that we were able to make. But I think it's great that we've actually been able to overcome that and, you know, kind of catch up, and are now more than 4 years into the progress, but we've seen great strides, I think. So another comment, I think, just on our sector and some of the benefits that we have in actually setting up both a clinical quality registry and a clinical trials network is that low prevalence actually helps us, we think, because there's a discrete sort of pocket of the both clinical and research population where it's kind of feasible to bring everybody together, try to get everybody on the same page. But what we'd found was that this wasn't actually happening. So trials were not meeting recruitment targets. We didn't have enough data coming through clinical services. There was a lot of different data being collected, and there was a lot of competition, and so we weren't actually succeeding in securing funding. And also we really everyone wanted to collaborate and actually listen to young people and their carers as well. Okay. So what we proposed was a change in the system that could actually facilitate collaboration. That's what APEX has grown out of, and really focusing in on that word of collaborative consortium, rather than specifically saying we're a registry or a clinical trials network. We wanted an umbrella that everybody felt that they could be a part of. So the three key stakeholder groups being clinical, research, and also lived experience with kind of equal weighting. So that we are these three very connected systems. We all sit in the same, you know, from an organisational point, we sit in the same team. We are, you know, I think we are, we still say we're the first, could be one of the first clinical quality registries in the mental health sector. I did note on the list that there was an eating disorders one listed, but I can't find anything about them. But I know lots of other areas in mental health are definitely interested in this. And we talked to lots of our colleagues about our experience. There are a number of clinical trial networks that are being currently set up and kind of operating in the mental health sector. There's a general adult clinical trial network, which kind of spans the whole of adult mental health, called Magnet. There's a child and youth, but very much focused on the child end of mental health, called Growing Minds Australia. But as the Australian Early Psychosis Clinical Quality Registry, we think we're quite still unique in that we're in the network, in that we've focused in on one area of the mental health spectrum, which means that we can operate as a network differently to how the others can as well. So yeah, and then we have our lived experience network, which is a very big part of what we do. We have specific funding that is dedicated to that part. So they feed into all parts of our CTN and CQR operations, but also have their own deliverables as well. Okay, so as a clinical trials network, we've deliberately included the word translation because we think that that is a crucial part of what clinical trial networks should be doing, and helping close that the loop between research and embedding successful findings back into practice. We've done a sector-wide research priority setting process where we are what's called a facilitating network, which means we don't actually run the trials, we facilitate them, funnily enough. And we really see our role as being that conduit between researchers themselves, pulling them in together to help them collaborate, setting the research priorities, but being that conduit to the clinical services as well. And that's definitely one of the enablers of having both clinical, a CQR and a network under the same umbrella, but also the link to the lived experience sector as well, we're finding is incredibly useful for our network. We do an endorsement process. We're actually supporting the development of some protocols at the moment, and also looking to continue to develop the research workforce. And when we say that, we mean that from every angle. It's not just the academic clinical workforce, but it's the clinical research workforce and also the lived experience research workforce, which is those two areas are not as well developed in our sector, because it is a very time-consuming clinical work, and it's a pretty challenging thing to actually be experiencing psychosis. But we find that a lot of the people that we engage with from the lived experience really want to give back. They are they're so giving. Given what they've been through, they just want to make the world a better place for the people that come after them. And we find that very, can't think of the word, sorry, gone. We're not a big sector, and that again is an enabler for us. So this is actually a little bit out of date, because I know that, but you can see we've got lots of, our registry recruits through services. So we target early psychosis services to work with, because that's actually where the recruitment for trials happens as well, typically. We are doing a piece of work at the moment where we're looking at barriers and enablers for the lived experience community to participate in all aspects of research. So we may look at expanding, and at being able to expand recruitment, but generally to participate in a trial, you need to be receiving care. So it's just, it means we're kind of locked into that model, but it means that through the registry, because we're going out and talking to people about the registry, we're actually able to talk to them about research as well. So when Andy Thompson, who's the lead investigator for APEX, and I travel around the countryside talking generally to clinical services, because that's what we find needs the most work in actually engaging them to come on board as a for the registry. They're really interested in research.
There's overlap sometimes.
Want to be a part of that. But we do have some great national collaborators and international collaborators, which is incredibly useful. It's been mentioned before, ACTors played a great support. The Royal College of Psychiatrists has been fantastic. SMHR is the Society for Mental Health Research, kind of the peak body for mental health researchers in Australia. Sorry, my next meeting's just popped in. We have governance that covers all three pillars of what we do and feeds up into an overarching advisory group. So the chairs from each of our different groups sit on our advisory councils. So there's lots of overlap. And they've all actually moved on to steering committees or scientific committees. They're no longer establishment committees. I realise this is a bit older. I'm going to keep moving because, and what we realised with the registry, I think before I move on to some very quick barriers and enablers, is that in mental health, you might be surprised to know, but generally there's no measurement-based outcome data collected that's actually meaningful. So what we're having to do is actually embed that across the sector, which has been a massive, massive job. Now, we're lucky in that half the services are actually ahead of the game in that there's a series of early psychosis services that are run through Headspace. So that is youth mental health based clinical service all across Australia. There are 6, soon to be 8, that run early psychosis services as well, and they do collect data. So we've piggybacked on that, their minimum data set very quickly. We're so over time, but we have used that data to embed and create our CQR that is based on an absolute minimum data set. We have one from, and it's based around key domains that have been agreed through sector-wide consultation. We provide that data back to clinical services pretty much immediately, which we think is a big selling point. But we're already getting a lot of interest from researchers about this data as well. So we know that that's going to be a valuable resource. We're already looking at trying to work out how we might do either registry-based trials and or platform trials based around the registries, because what this is enabling us to do is spread our research capacity more broadly than we could have ever possibly dreamed. And the amazing thing is that people want it. They want to be a part of this. They want the registry and they want the research too. Now, the realities of doing research are very different. You've got to get the funding first, but I'm pleased to say that we will at least be able to provide them with the registry. We've been refunded recently to spread to up to another 20 early psychosis sites across Australia over the next 4 years. So we're really excited that we're going to live to fight another day. And this, I want to end on this because I think it's really important. I could talk to you for hours about our lived experience network, but this comes from Dee, who is our lived experience network coordinator. She comes with her own lived experience of psychosis, and she does the most remarkable job. She's still a young person. She is coordinating stuff at a national level and is never afraid to speak her mind. But when we focus research on what treatments create the best long-term outcomes, we are telling young people with early psychosis there is hope. And that, I think, really sums up why we're trying to do this together. So it's about providing good care, it's about being able to do the research, and it's about providing hope to people for whom, 10, 15, 20 years ago, there was no hope. And that is absolutely what drives me every day. I'm going to leave it on that because I like that one a lot. Thank you. Please get in touch if you've got any questions.
Thanks so much, Jo. I think both endometriosis and early psychosis are clearly areas of unmet need. And, you know, having these data platforms will just enable research to be done that, as you say, could never have been done before. And especially where in things like, I imagine, psychosis has hardly got any new interventions, or maybe there will be new interventions. You've actually got now a platform where you can monitor them, monitor the safety, monitor the outcomes and all that sort of stuff. Sometimes actually setting up, having something set up now before these new treatments come on is great, because then when the new treatments come on, you've got the infrastructure to really assess them and really understand them at a, you know, at a real world level. So that is fantastic. I also wanted to say that you know, one of the challenges, I think it's fantastic you've tried to move from a model of competition to collaboration. One of the challenges will be as you get bigger and more successful is everyone wants your data and you've got to resource that, you know what I mean? And I'm finding that too, that you almost become a victim of your own success, and you've got to make sure that people aren't duplicating things, and you've got to run a bit of a coordinating center. But it's a good problem to have, but it's, you know, the resource, it's not like once you've got all your sites on board, you don't have to do any sort of work. You can just get into the research. You've got then the coordination of your activities and what's going on. Just so impressive, and how interesting, like you learn so much from each new presentation. And I think the model of having the network supporting the registry activity is so important, because that, as you say, really brings the research and the registry together. And, you know, that doesn't always exist, and where you do, it's so much more powerful. Is there any other questions anyone would like to ask Jo? I'm aware we're a few minutes over time. I'm sorry, Jo, that we've gone a little bit over.
No, that's okay. Like I said, really happy to get in touch if anyone has anything or wants to hear a bit more. I didn't even really get in. I had a whole lot of other stuff, but it's fine.
Well, hopefully we'll hear more from our speakers at the meeting at the end of the year, if they've put in abstracts and they're successful. So I think that's it for today. Thank you so much for your time, everyone. We've had a great attendance, and we look forward to seeing you at the annual meeting in a couple of months, and we'll be providing you with more information soon about that. Okay, we'll let you go. Thank you so much.